John Harbaugh has taken a giant step forward in his career, and this may just be the perfect fit for him. Let's talk about it next on this special edition of the Big Blue Breakdown Live. Hi again, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Big Blue Breakdown Live. I'm Paul Dottino. We invite you to, as always, stay tuned for all your Big Blue news on the New York Giants on SI YouTube channel and media network. We usually come your way on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern time with this program. But tonight, well, come on. The big news. John Harbaugh introduced as the newest coach of the New York Football Giants. And there was simply no way that we could postpone the show, or at least, should I say, air the show at its regularly scheduled time. We know that you guys want to talk about it, and you want as much information as you can get to digest this and to enjoy the excitement and enthusiasm that permeated the Giants training camp facility, the Quest Diagnostics Training Center. Now, coming up today, okay, not only are we going to talk about John Harbaugh, and I hope you guys want to come in on the chats over to the right of your screen or make a video or audio call. You can use the blotch up there, the Q code, right? Or you could use the link down at the bottom of the screen. Certainly would love to have you. But we have two very special guests tonight. This is a first for the Big Blue Breakdown. We have never had two guests on the same show before. But coming up in just a little bit, I will have former UConn safety Andrew Adams, who spent 2 seasons with the Giants, including the 2016 playoff season when they went to Green Bay and lost to the Packers. And after his second season with the Giants, then he landed in Tampa Bay, wound up winning a Super Bowl ring with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then after a pit stop in training camp back with the Giants, he went to the Tennessee Titans. And then finally, in his final NFL season in 2023, Andrew Adams was with the Baltimore Ravens and played for head coach John Harbaugh. So I thought it was important if I could get a Giant, a former Giant, on the program who had also played for Harbaugh with the Baltimore Ravens. And indeed, Andrew Adams fits that bill. And we're going to hear from him live in a very short time on this program. Now, as far as later on, well, you've already seen the promos I put up. I'm sure you understand this. I decided also that with all of this conversation, right, regarding the structure, if you will, of the Giants' deal with Harbaugh, it seemed to me that getting a front office perspective was going to be important because, after all, we've heard from analysts who know John Harbaugh, and you'll hear from a player who played for him. And I think a few other people may have tried to reach some of the Ravens at one point or another over the course of the weekend. And that's really good. But nobody that I read or heard talk to a front office person to discuss how this new arrangement might work for the Giants. What kind of control does John Harbaugh usually have or did have with the Baltimore Ravens? How that would translate to the Giants. And if he did have significant control, or does, as according to the new contract he got with Big Blue, how might he push the levers in terms of trying to rebuild this team and get the Giants back into playoff contention? Because after all, he made the playoffs in 12 out of 18 years as head coach of the Baltimore Ravens. And so I did reach out and I found somebody, Vinny Cerrato, who spent nearly 20 years as a player personnel director for both the San Francisco 49ers and the Washington Redskins at the time. Also, for a while, was running the Notre Dame football program. Vinny won a Super Bowl with the 49ers. He worked with head coach Joe Gibbs. He worked with head coach Bill Walsh, okay? And it just so happens that after he left the Redskins, he wound up settling in Baltimore and became really good friends with John Harbaugh. And many times sat and consulted with him over many things, including roster issues. So Vinny is a really good source of information here. In addition to, him being a friend of Harbaugh's, he now is working at 105.7 FM, The Fan in Baltimore, where he does co-host a midday show. But of course, that's of interest to the Ravens fans because they're trying to figure out who he thinks may be the next coach for the Ravens. But no one had asked him from the Giants' perspective, what system, what kind of power structure did the Ravens have? How did Harbaugh fit into that? How much did he influence the draft? How much did he influence free agency? What kind of players does he look for? What are his coaching techniques? These are all things that I thought I would get from a front office perspective, since so much was made out of the Giants for the first time in their history, putting it down in writing that the GM and the coach will be collaborative and that only John Mara up at the ownership level would be able to have the final say on anything. The Giants have always given their general manager the final say on any type of football decisions. Now it's going upstairs, and the final say will go to John Mara. So it is a little bit of a different change. Now, Chris Mara, who obviously, as we know, is senior VP with the Giants and part of the family, he said that while that is true and it was put in writing and they had no problem doing that, he actually used the phrase this way. He said, as far as personnel decisions or the draft, Harbaugh is the most important cog in the wheel, but that it will be a collaborative effort and that the Giants organization is comfortable with him. So that's the big headline or the big bump in the road, so to speak, that a lot of people tried to make it out to be last week, when in fact, as it turns out, in talking to John Harbaugh and Joe Schoen today and Chris Mara, that was not a bump in the road at all. In fact, it was pretty much obvious from the very get-go when Chris Mara went down to meet John Harbaugh a week ago this past Sunday. That hurdle was very easy to clear. And then finally, as everything got down to the nitty-gritty and they had to actually sign the papers and all of the writing had been completed, that's when John Mara himself, even though they had shaken hands on that Wednesday afternoon at 4:30 when Harbaugh was at the Giants facility. Remember, he flew up in the plane that was sent by Giants co-owner Steve Tisch. Even though they had shaken hands on Wednesday at 4:30, they had an agreement in principle and everything was understood. But as you can imagine, when you're talking about a deal of this nature, you need to get everything down in writing. All your I's have to be dotted. All of your T's have to be crossed. And so it was not until Saturday when John Mara saw the papers and said, yes, this is correct. This is what we're doing. And then Joe Schoen saw the papers and said, yes, this is correct. This is exactly how we have agreed to it. Let's sign this thing and get it done. And so that's what finally happened. And when the ink was actually dry and everything got settled on Saturday. So that brings you guys up to speed a little bit on what happened at today's press conference. But as I said to you just moments ago during the early portion of the show, I really wanted to bring on somebody who had a Giants connection, but also had an experience with Baltimore Ravens head coach John Harbaugh. And what do you know? I found somebody. It wasn't that hard because he used to play for UConn. You all know him around the tri-state area. Again, he played for the 2016 playoff New York Giants, and that is Andrew Adams. Andrew, so great to have you on the program tonight. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Love connecting with you.
So as you can see, Andrew is joining us by remote from down, I don't know, are you outside of Atlanta right now as the owner of Pro Level Recovery? And I do want to make sure you place a plug before we send you off. But come on, you're a Northeast guy. What are you doing down there? You were a UConn guy.
Yeah, I grew up in the Atlanta area. I grew up in
I
Fayetteville.
know you did. I'm busting your
Yeah,
horns.
but yeah, I'm living in Marietta now.
All right, so we have Andrew on, and Andrew, you spent a couple years with the Giants. You went to the playoffs with the Giants. You went and won a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay. And then you also happened to finish your career in 2023 with Jim Harbaugh and the Baltimore Ravens. So you've got a vast array of experiences. You also with Tennessee, right? So you had a lot of experiences with a bunch of different coaches. I would like you to give us a thumbnail capsule on your experience with John Harbaugh in 2023. What did you see about him that really impressed you? What did you really like? Were there some things that maybe made you shake your head just a little bit?
I had a great experience with Coach Harbaugh, Baltimore. Obviously, we had a good year. We didn't win the Super Bowl, but we had a very successful year. And from day one coming in, I felt the standard was the standard level of standard, the way they do things, the way he ran the building, essentially, very similar to that feel you get when you walk in the Giants facility, right? There's a standard, there's trophies, used to winning, right? There's a way that Harbaugh does things, and there's a way that he's been successful. And I think bringing that to New York will be very beneficial, right? I think it marries well from his stint in Baltimore coming now to New York.
I've heard a phrase describing him as tough but fair. How accurate do you think that is, or is there maybe a better way to describe him?
He's definitely tough. I would say that. Kind of, your old school, football, but fair in a sense that I guess old school coaches aren't considered players coaches in a sense. And I would say Harbaugh, in a sense, is a player's coach, right? He sits in the meetings with the players, right? Individual position meetings, right? All head coaches don't do that. You can approach him at any point throughout the day and ask him anything, and he'll be honest and open with you. So I think, right, and it might not always be what you want to hear, right? But it's honest, right? And it's probably what you need to hear. So I would say that about him.
Did he rely on leaders in the locker room to get some of the messages across and to kind of get all the troops in line, or was he a guy who was hands-on and did all of that himself?
No, I think every good team, right, there are leaders in the locker room that essentially run the locker room, right? In professional sports that, is more prominent than, amateur sports. But I would say he has a good hold on, on his group and the men that he leads. I wouldn't say he relies on, his veterans and his leaders, but all good, great teams, right, have good leaders in the locker room.
Sure. I think it's interesting because we all look at him and we stamp him as a CEO coach, as a guy who's going to let his coordinators and position guys do a lot of the stuff. But you just said to me a few minutes ago or moments ago that he would sit in the individual position rooms. So I'm curious, do you think that CEO coach is a misnomer? Maybe he's not as much of a CEO coach as maybe people think?
What do you mean? What do you describe CEO coach?
Well, I think when most people think CEO coach, they think of the coordinators are going to be the guys who maybe do the game plans, but the head coach just has veto power or a general overview philosophy. Those guys will call the plays in the games. He's not going to be really breathing down their necks. And he's going to manage the game on game day and not necessarily get involved with any of the individual positions. I think that's what most people think of a CEO coach to be.
Yeah. I wouldn't label him that.
Okay.
I wouldn't label him that. I've seen him very involved in the defense, not saying that he's dictating what Mike McDonald was doing, but I mean, I do remember him being very involved on game day in what was happening, making adjustments. And I like that, from a head coach of, him being in the trenches essentially with, whatever it might be a special team scheme, right? He sits in the special teams meeting. Definitely all head coaches don't sit in special teams meetings, right?
Sure.
He sits in a manner where he's next to players and he might have a tidbit, right, to add here and there. So I wouldn't say he's hands off, right, when it comes to coordinators. I don't know exactly what goes on upstairs, but I mean, I think coordinators, and when I was there, the coordinators did a great job of offense, defense, special teams. I mean, yeah, so I wouldn't label him right that. I mean, to me.
Okay, well, no, you lived it. You were in his locker room. That's why I'm asking you. And I wonder too, we've heard a lot about him being a good teacher because Father Jack was a longtime college coach, and we're hearing that he is a really good teacher. From what you're telling me about his interaction with players, it seems like that was definitely part of his mission.
100%. I think you hit it, right on the head. I think that's his background, and like you said, his father, his brother. I think that's how they evolved to great coaches is being good teachers.
Was he also a guy that, despite being tough, could you see some lighthearted moments with him too? I mean, I know you came to the Giants with Ben McAdoo right after Tom Coughlin had left. I'm sure you heard stories about Tom Coughlin. We all know stories about Tom. Heck, I knew him for all the years he was here.
Yeah.
But did you get a sense that, there were times where he could still crack a smile and still keep it light with you guys on occasion?
100%. Yeah, I don't think he was all, serious, 100% of the time. He definitely, there were definitely jokes, lighthearted moments. Like I said, he felt with his players, he interacted with his players. And I think that's what you want from a head coach.
He told us today that he's all about players who are all about ball. You have to think football all the time, at practice, when you're eating, when you're watching film, when you're studying the plays, and obviously when you're on the field in the games. He said, because if a guy doesn't love football and doesn't want to be all about football all the time, then he can play for another team. I mean, that's a pretty strong statement to make, especially on your first day on a new job. I'm guessing you saw some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of coaches, are like that. I wouldn't say that is. I mean, I think that's a point, right, to get across of being a professional essentially, and I mean the great ones, right? It is your job, right? So the great ones take it outside of the building, right, to be the best at their job. But I mean, everybody's human and has other interests, etc. So nobody's a robot, I would say. But yeah, definitely it is. Keep the main thing the main thing.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would want people to know about your experience with Harbaugh during that 2023 season that I haven't asked you about, or that you think is relevant to how he's going to work with the Giants, a team that has a lot of young players? They're trying to get out of the quicksand because it's been a couple of tough years. And for the most part, It's been a tough decade. You were here for one of the 2 playoff seasons of the last decade. So you were fortunate in that regard.
Yeah.
But, New York, New York. Heck, you played at UConn. This is a hotbed. The microwave can get turned on to ultra high when you don't win.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I can say that he's not okay with losing, right? Losing is not accepted. It's not something that, gets swept under the rug. All my experiences, were positive, I would say. Yeah, I think he's going to do a great job in New York. I think his name holds enough weight to be successful, in that market. I think he can handle, the New York media, New York criticism, and still keep, like I say, the main thing. Right? He's so entrenched in ball and coaching and teaching that I don't believe outside New York noise will affect what he does in the building.
If I can, you just said a second ago, he doesn't really like to lose. That's a problem. How does he react to losing? Do you guys kind of know? We just lost the game Sunday, and Monday's not going to be fun.
It's more of a culture thing, I would say. It's very dark. It's very dark, in the building, right? It's just felt that we need to get things fixed, and what needs to get fixed is going to be addressed.
Right. And at the same time, when things went well, was he quick to pat you guys on the back?
Yeah, I guess that's one thing I didn't mention. Interactions with him and the team is that he's very uplifting and confident in his players, and in his game plans and how he expects, right, his team to perform against the other team, right? He builds that. Because I played, on a team with Tom, right? All 53 players step across those white lines expecting to win, not just rolling the ball out. I'm gonna do my job, and I don't really know what's gonna happen, but he builds that belief, I would say, into his players, into his team, that what we do is better than what they do, and we're gonna go out there and kick butt.
And finally, I know because you played some special teams, obviously, in your career, and he was a special teams coach. Do you find that he does pay maybe more attention to special teams than maybe some other head coaches might?
Yes. Maybe out in the open, but maybe all coaches pay attention to it. But yeah, yes, definitely out in the open, I would say. He puts emphasis on it.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see how he can turn things around here, Andrew. I hope that after all that you've told us, I hope that all of these things that he put into place in Baltimore and made them such a winning organization can help turn the Giants around quickly.
Agreed. I hope so too, as well. I'm always rooting for the Giants.
Well, why don't you give people just one quick second as to what you're doing here, because we have Pro Level Recovery here at the bottom of the screen under your name, and I know that's a business that you're very proud of.
Yeah, so I acquired the company from my father. He's owned the company for about 30 years. He's physical therapy, right? My experience in the healthcare industry has been pretty top notch of being a professional athlete, right? I've had back surgery, knee surgery, shoulder surgery, you kind of name it. And pro athletes have access to some of the best care in the country. General public population, a lot of the times doesn't have the access pro athletes do. So at Pro Level Recovery, we bridge that gap, give general population access to what pro athletes have access to when they walk in their training room.
And they can get you at prolevelrecovery.com, right? The company website.
Correct.
Andrew Adams,
we have 3
thank
locations
you so much
across Atlanta. Thank you.
Go
Have a good
ahead.
one.
I appreciate your time, my friend. You have a great night. And again,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Have a good one.
You too. So there you go. Rather than tell you about all things that we've heard, we just went right to the source. Andrew Adams played for the Giants in 2016 and 2017, won a Super Bowl championship with Tampa Bay in 2020, and then wound up playing his final year as a safety and special teams player with the Baltimore Ravens in 2023. And he gave us a firsthand account of what it's like to be a player under Jim Harbaugh. So I don't think we can do any better than that. So we just gave you that interview. And I appreciate, again, Andrew for coming on and giving us some of his time this evening. Now, coming up in just a little bit, all right, just a little bit, we're going to get to my other interview of the night with Vinny Cerrato, former NFL personnel executive, who I spoke with this morning. And he didn't have time to come on tonight, but I spoke to him this morning. And we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. First, I want to get to some of your chats because I know you folks have a lot of questions. I do want to add one other piece of important news that we did get from the press conference today. Joe Schoen saying that Cam Skattebo is on track to potentially participate in the offseason program starting on April the 6th. Now, that doesn't mean he would participate in full, but that he would be able to potentially do something in the offseason program. That's great news. Also, regarding Malik Nabers, Shane said today he is on schedule to this point to be prepared for the start of training camp. Fingers crossed for the Giants for both of those players because they are going to be a huge factor moving forward as John Harbaugh, who has already been quoted as telling people over the weekend he's looking for a playoff spot this fall with the Giants. He and Joe Schoen are both very, very optimistic about turning this team around and quickly based on the young foundation of talent that they have on the team and also based on what they believe was a lot of real tough circumstances with all the last-minute losses that we know about. In fact, Coach Harbaugh said today he thought that the Ravens had a few games like that too, where they wound up getting frittered away at the very end of games, and that he thought the Ravens were a better team than their record, and he thought the same thing for the Giants. So we will see. All right, Armand Duda says, attack each day with enthusiasm unknown to mankind. And he says, Andrew Adams was a good player for us. So he's very happy to see him on the program. Aiden Fink says, turns out my report that you were hired as the next Giants head coach wasn't true. Aiden, you could have come right to the source. I'd have been quotable on that. I would have told you flat out that I wasn't the guy. Armand says, stories sell better than the truth. How true is that? Vince G18 says, imagine McDermott, who just got fired by the Bills, as the defensive coordinator. That would be interesting. I wonder if the Baltimore Ravens would not be a spot for McDermott, considering the fact that he has an extensive playoff resume. And the only other guy with that high of a level resume is Mike McCarthy, who, as you know, is from the Pittsburgh area and is apparently going to interview with the Pittsburgh Steelers if he hasn't already. So that looks like that's a pretty good match. So if the Ravens want to go after an accomplished head coach who's done a lot of postseason appearances, McDermott might be a good selection for Baltimore. Armand Duda does want to mention he wasn't just a special teams coach. That is correct. He was not. He also coached the secondary 1 year for the Philadelphia Eagles under Andy Reid. There's a lot of other stories that I could tell you, but I do think in the next minute or so, I want to get to the interview with Vinny Cerrato because he talks about Harbaugh's impact on the draft, Harbaugh's impact just flat out on the roster, Harbaugh's impact on the scheme and what he wants to run, what kind of players he might like in free agency. There's a whole lot there to digest. So let me get to that in just a moment. Oh, look at this. I can't go anywhere without going to Scott Young, 1669. Paul, really loved your Rolling Stone Mick Jagger singing this afternoon. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was kind of excited this afternoon because, after all, it was a very, very energetic day down at Giant Stadium. As I like to say, the fizz was back in the soda pop, as opposed to some of that flat stuff that we've been having to digest over the last several years. All right, so I'm going to get back to your chats in just a little bit. Again, you can make an audio or a video call by going up to the QR blotch, or if you see the link down below, and I will get to as many of you folks as I can. I'd like to try to stay for another hour, okay, because we got two guests. We got double barrel action on the Big Blue Breakdown Live tonight. And right now, I want to turn it over to Vinny Cerrato. He spent nearly 20 years as an NFL personnel executive. He won a Super Bowl with the San Francisco 49ers before his tenure with the Washington Redskins. That's what they were called at the time. He's also, for the last several years, become very good friends with John Harbaugh, and they discuss football around the clock. He also hosts a daily radio show on 105.7 FM in Baltimore. But the people in Baltimore are more concerned with what Harbaugh didn't do and who his successor is going to be. I know you people in New York want to know more about what Harbaugh does and what he brings to the table and what he's going to do for the Giants. And since Cerrato was a longtime front office executive, I thought he might have a different side of the prism, a different perspective, if you will, from some of the stuff we've heard from other people. So one of the things that I wanted to ask him right off the top was about the change in the Giants front office structure, in that the head coach, John Harbaugh, and the GM, Joe Schoen, are now going to collaborate and be partners. And the final say in all decisions is going to go upstairs to ownership, which right now, that man in charge is John Mara. The Giants have never had that before. Now, despite the fact that there could have been casual conversations along those lines, they've never put that in the contract. It was always that the general manager was a little bit higher level than the head coach. Well, John Harbaugh had it where he was even with the general manager in Baltimore. So obviously, wherever it was that he was going to land, he wanted to have the same structure that he had with the Ravens. And why wouldn't you? 12 playoff appearances in 18 years, plus a Super Bowl ring to boot. So, having all of that being said, I asked Vinny Cerrato, what is the key to making this particular power structure work?
Well, I think the big thing, and you know what, when I was at the Niners and the Redskins, was the same thing. When I was with Joe Gibbs, it was, a partnership, and he had more say so because of who he was, just kind of like John. But the thing what made the Niners so good when we won Super Bowls and stuff was everybody understood their role. Everybody understood what their job was, and everybody was cool with that. Like I was in charge of, in San Fran, I was in charge of the personnel. So I set it up, I organized it, and I ran the meetings, but the head coach was sitting right there, and he's watching film and as long as it's a organizational decision, that's all I cared about. And I think that's all Harbs cares about is that everybody has a say, because we would always have the assistant coaches heavily involved in draft preparations and stuff, so because the coaches know exactly what they need and they know the types of players they're looking for. And I think the biggest thing, what Joe Schoen has to do is, and I remember doing this too, is you got to go into Harbs and say, all right, Harbs, what kind of players are we looking for? Positionally, you tell me, because I got to let my scouts know what they're looking for when they're on the road. Because like when I was in San Fran, and you probably remember this in the day, Bob McKittrick was our O-line coach. And, and Bill, he started with Bill Walsh. Didn't want any O-linemen over 300 pounds because he wanted athletic guys. So that made it real easy for our scouts. Because I remember when I was in San Fran, I'd go to a school, and somebody would say, hey, there's a lineman that you'll like, at such and such school, because everybody knew that we like guys under 300 pounds. And at that time, receivers, our scouts, you don't even have to look at a receiver under 6 foot tall at that time, because that's what we wanted. So that's the thing that Joe has to do with Harbs is, all right, Harbs, for my scouts and my personnel people, what do we want? What's your ideal player? So if you give me your ideal player, we can work from off of the what you're looking for, what the best guy that you could find you're looking for, and then we could work off of that. I think that is the biggest thing. And then once you come, with that, then it gets easy, because then everybody sees the same thing. And when you're sitting and you're evaluating, everybody knows what John Harbaugh wants. And that's how your report's got to change too.
Right. Now, from what you know of John, how easy is he to get along with? Is he the type of guy who will be a smooth situation as he comes to the Giants, or is making this transition for him going to be difficult because he's more of a hard-nosed kind of guy who says, no, it's got to be exactly this way?
No, John's not like that at all. I mean, I've been around John for a long time now. I was at every OTA practice. I was at every mini camp practice. I was at, the draft meetings, his off-the-record meetings. He would call me at times, if he needed something, or like if I saw that he was interviewing somebody, who I had been with or whatever, I would call and talk to him about those guys. So Harbs is really, really easy to get along with. And Harbs just wants to win, and that's the thing. Now, the other thing when, we're talking about personnel is what do you got to do to win the division? That's what you got to do. What do we have to do to win the division? You can say, Super Bowl, blah, blah, blah. You got to win the division first. So where are we personnel-wise in the division? And that's what they got to evaluate. And I'm sure, Harbs loves to watch film. And I've talked to him a few times when he's been at Indy. When he goes to Indy, he spends most of the day just watching film. Like Eric will give him the top guys or whatever, and he'll sit there and watch film all day long. So Harbs loves to watch film. And the people are going to love Harbs. I mean, I think he's great. Like I'll talk to him after practice and the thing with Harbs is like I could talk to him after and, I could give him my opinion on things and I say, Harbs, I didn't, he'll say, what'd you think of this guy? I said, well, I didn't really like him or whatever. He said, well, I didn't see that, kind of thing. So Harbs is really easy to get along with. The media's going to love him, because he's a pro. He knows how to handle the media, and he knows what the media's job is, and he knows what they've got to do. And I mean, Harbs, he's going to be frustrated after a loss, but after a win, he's going to be the happiest guy in the world. And on Mondays, it'll reflect that when he talks. But and the thing that I like too is like before two-a-days started, we'd always have an off the record with the media and stuff, and he was very honest with it.
Wow. All right, let me ask you this. Back to a moment ago when you talked about the blueprint for the personnel. Aside from the measurables, which are required for each position based on what the coach wants, could you describe for me what the typical John Harbaugh type player is, mentality-wise, philosophy-wise?
I think, it's similar to like what Joe Gibbs would always tell me. You can't win with dumb guys, and you can't. With Harbs, he's going to want tough, competitive, smart. Tough, competitive, and smart. And then they've got to have, all the measurables to go along with it. But I mean, if he has that, tough, competitive, and smart, got a good chance of playing for John Harbaugh.
Now, obviously, you're going to want to try to get those players ready-made for him when they get here. But how is he in terms of that teaching aspect of being a coach? Because sometimes, as you well know, Vinny, yep, these college players, they're not ready-made. You don't just add water, as Carl Banks likes to say, and they go right out onto the field and they're ready to go. There's a teaching aspect here. How does he relate in terms of that aspect of the job?
Harbaugh's a big time fundamentalist. And when you go out to practice, you'll get a chance to see, because when they go out to practice, they're working individual stuff, and they do a ton of fundamental stuff, which I appreciate. When I was at Notre Dame, in college, I coached receivers some. So, I watch the receivers coaches and things. And, the O-line coach, I've always loved watching O-line because, I was with Joe Bugle and Bob McKittrick, two of the best. And, flat back toughness and come off and keep your feet moving and stay on your feet and do all those types of things. Harbaugh's going to be really, really into the fundamental stuff. So they'll be excellent, fundamentally in what they do. Outside arm, outside leg free, shoulders over your pads with the receivers. You got to bend your knees. And, so Harbaugh's gets it. Being a special teams coach, you coached all the positions, so he'll understand all of those things.
All right, so we'll have more from Vinny Cerrato in just a few minutes. Let me get back to some of your tweets, or should I say your comments over in the chat. Again, if you'd like to call me up, we'll be glad to do that too. And then we will get back to more with Vinny Cerrato. And again, particularly, I get into some details about the draft and free agency and that kind of stuff and some of Harbaugh's techniques. And I think you'll find the rest of that very interesting as well. Armand Duda says Titans and Falcons probably would have tried for McDermott had they both been so far in on their interviews and such. James O'Keefe, New York 2CC, says, good evening, Paul. Looking forward to Coach Harbaugh filling out his staff. Good days ahead. All right, let me get to that topic before we go anywhere else. Coach Harbaugh did say there's a group of guys from the Ravens coaching staff he would like to bring up to the Giants. But at this point, he does not know if they're going to come or if they'll be available. He is going to start interviewing assistant coaches tomorrow, including the in-house candidates that he has heard so much about. Joe Schoen will also be part of those interviews as he and Harbaugh discuss some of the candidates that they'd like to get. Interestingly enough, Chris Mara, John Harbaugh, and Joe Schoen all said that they don't expect anything more than potentially minor tweaks to the Giants front office staff. So for those who think that Harbaugh is coming in here with a broom and really sweeping out a whole bunch of things, that does not appear to be the case. Now, of course, coaches are a different story, but it does not sound like, based on today, all three gentlemen involved in the process saying that minor tweaks, perhaps, in terms of the structure of the Giants football operation. We should mention John Mara did attend the news conference today. He did come to the front row, sat down, watched the introduction, watched Harbaugh, watched Schoen, and then shortly thereafter left. So it was Chris Mara, as we all know, his younger brother, who basically was the spokesperson for the ownership group today. Ms. Koch was there as well. As you know, she bought 10% of the team. She does not have any say. It is a silent partnership of 10%. It's an equity partnership. She was there today. And of course, so was the Tisch family. Steve Tisch did not speak either. The only people to speak from the Giants side of things were Coach Harbaugh, GM Joe Schoen, and of course, as I said, Chris Mara. Let's see, what else do we have for you today? Just a couple of different items. I don't know if you guys actually saw the press conference earlier this afternoon, or if you went to Giants.com and saw it on the archive. I don't necessarily want to go too deep into a lot of the stuff that was said at the presser. I'm more into telling you guys some of what was said on the side, because I thought that stuff was a little bit more interesting and more informative. Chris Mara saying the Giants wanted to act and not react. They knew there were going to be many openings this offseason for head coaches. And so that is the reason that he went down to see Harbaugh a week ago this past Sunday. Apparently on the Friday before the Steelers and Ravens played, Chris said that he talked to his brother John Mara and also Steve Tisch and basically had convinced them that he was going to go down to Baltimore on Sunday with the anticipation that if Harbaugh's let go, that the Giants could be first in line and make a very strong pitch. Interestingly enough, Chris had never met John Harbaugh before, never spoken to him before. He reached out to Coach Tom Coughlin, believe it or not, who then made the connection because John Harbaugh had been friendly with Coach Coughlin for many years. And Coach Coughlin, of course, recommended that John come to the Giants. He then told Chris Mara to get your butt down there because he thought he should go down there and try to get him to coach the Giants. We also know that John Harbaugh did talk to his father, Jack Harbaugh, who not only told him after watching the Giants game against the Los Angeles Chargers and brother Jim Harbaugh's team, that he was extremely impressed by Jackson Dart, the Giants running backs, and their offensive line. Said he really liked what he saw on tape. He reviewed the offense, believe it or not, in detail and felt like he liked the effort, the physicality, and what those guys brought to the table. He told me himself, Jack told me himself, that he told John in that conversation 3 days after he had been released by the Ravens that you better take a serious look at the Giants because this is the team you need to go to. And then he specifically cited the offensive line. So I asked Jack Harbaugh, I said, well, if you're that impressed with the Giants offensive line, and by the way, it hadn't been very good up until this past season, and they were able to turn it around, might not be a bad idea if John Harbaugh decides to hold on to the offensive line coach, Carmen Brasillo. And of course, Jack, in a very kidding, fun kind of way, said, I kind of told him about that offensive line. So we will see where that goes in terms of that particular position group for the Giants, which we all know is incredibly critical. And to me, next to the defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator, is the most important member of the staff that John Harbaugh will put together. Chris Mara did go on to say there was never any doubt during the course of the week that they were going to get the deal. Never thought it would fall through. So the whole sky is falling story, at least from Chris Mara's perspective, was not going to happen. And let's see, what else is there? He said he thought the biggest change that John Harbaugh would have to deal with, or challenge, I should say, is the New York media, because there's very little Baltimore media, a fraction compared to what we see here in New York. All right, let me quickly go back again to Vinny Cerrato, and we'll get back to more of your quotes, your calls, your tweets, or your chats, or whatever. And we heard Andrew Adams say he doesn't know if he would describe Harbaugh as a CEO head coach, although a lot of people around the league seem to believe that. Now, yeah, a CEO head coach oversees the entire staff and doesn't necessarily get into a lot of the minutia stuff. Well, even though you kind of want to describe him as a CEO kind of guy, Cerrato says Harbaugh is never afraid to get his hands dirty.
No, I think Harbs is involved. Harbs is involved. He'll be involved a lot. I know, especially, kind of reminded me a little bit of Lou Holtz. Lou Holtz was the CEO type, delegator type. But if your position was struggling, then he would get involved. And I kind of see that, with John. I think John, initially is going to let his people do it. And, and you kind of saw that with the defense, last year. They brought in Dean Peace. The defense was struggling. All right, I need to do something, to improve. So I think you're going to see that with John. And I think what people don't realize is John knows it all. Offensively, defensively, he knows everything going on. He's heavily involved in all the game plans. So it's not like he's just sitting in his office. No, he's in the meetings. And he does a lot of stuff with the players, you know, like motivating them during the week and talking to the players. And he has a real good feel for what's happening, you know, with the players mentally, physically, all those types.
We talked all the time when Tom Coughlin was here, how he was so energetic, so motivated, so dedicated to the job. He never looked or sounded like his age. For those who say, well, he's done this now for 18 years in Baltimore, maybe the tread on the tire might be a little thin. Could this change re-energize him, reinvigorate him? As much as you know him, how do you feel about that factor?
I think he'll be definitely re-energized. I think he'll be excited. You know, after 18 years, I mean, we talked about it on our show that, you know, this was a move that was good for both. You know, you needed a new voice, probably got stale after 18 years. And Harbs, he's going to be re-energized. He's going to be feeling good. He's, you know, he goes to the weight room at 4 a.m. every day. And he's 63 years old. He's squatting and doing everything else. You know,
are you beating him to the weight room?
No, I go to the weight room, but I won't be there at 4. You know, but Harbs is in great shape, and he loves football. Wait till you meet his dad. Wait till you meet his dad, Jack.
The whole family. Sure.
Yeah, Jack will probably be there today, I would imagine. You know, and his dad's an awesome guy, you know, and he was lifetime coach also.
Is he the type of magnet that, as the Giants try to navigate free agent waters, you know, they have a few key free agents themselves, and they also are going to want to try to get a couple of free agents because, let's face it, this ship is not complete. They do need some pieces and parts. Can he be a magnet to acquire personnel because they want to play for him?
Yeah, I think, you know, after dealing with free agency and all those types of things, money controls it.
Sure.
You know, kind of like the NIL nowadays with college. You know, it's all about the money. You can do all the recruiting and stuff you want, but how much is he going to get paid? I think the organization of the New York Giants kind of says it all. And having a stable person like John Harbaugh, I think it makes it easy. And Harbs, I'm sure, has a ton of good relationships with agents because that's kind of who controls it. And the other thing is are the players happy there? Because the players are the ones that sell it more so than anything. You know, if the players are happy, you know, if the player says, "No, you don't want to come here. This place stinks," you know. But if you got a guy like Harbs, hey, you know, we're going to be good. If you make it the place to be, you know, and people, a lot of guys, especially as they get older, what do they want to do? They want to win a Super Bowl. So you're going to have the opportunity if you're that. And that's what the Ravens have been. And that's why the Ravens, you know, got some guys here over the last couple of years on one-year deals is because why? They want to win. The year we won the Super Bowl in 94, we had 16 guys on one-year deals. Why? They wanted to win. And I'm sure it was the same when, you know, Eli was there and Tom Coughlin and, you know, and all the guys they want to play for winners.
Yeah. Nothing like winning.
Nothing better.
Vinny, let me ask you this, if I may. We all know about Harbaugh's track record. It's outstanding. And we understand he's won a Super Bowl. He's won a ton of playoff games, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're part of the front office meeting interviewing him, what boxes, besides the power structure situation to get settled, besides knowing what he was going to want to do with his assistant coaches and his staff, what empty boxes would you have going into that meeting that he would have to check when you sat down with him?
Well, I think the thing you want to know is, you know, it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of weird. It's like when Dan Snyder made me interview Joe Gibbs. He says, you got to interview Joe, you know, you got to interview him like you're interviewing all the other candidates, you know, and, you know, and it's kind of like, okay, what do I ask? You know, a guy that's won a Super Bowl, you know, and a Hall of Fame guy, you know, I mean, what do I ask? You know, and more so he was like Joe Gibbs, like the one question he asked me, Joe says, let me ask you a question. He said, I only have one question. What position can you win with dumb guys? And I said, maybe corner if you play a lot of man, but otherwise none. He said, exactly. I don't want dumb guys.
Which showed that you were a smart guy.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
As you look at the Giants now from afar, and I know that you're in Baltimore, so you haven't studied the Giants,
No.
but I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with certainly some of their key personnel. Harbaugh was quoted as saying over the weekend that he's looking to make the playoffs this year, which, quite frankly, a lot of new coaches won't say when they get into a new job. Are you surprised by his boldness, or do you understand that maybe he sees that there are foundational pieces here that could turn the Giants around quickly?
Well, I think he's setting expectations. Here's the thing with Harbs is when he talks to the media, he's talking to his players. So that's what he's telling his players.
So did Parcells, by the way.
Yes. Oh, that's what all the good coaches do. I mean, Bill Walsh did the same thing. Joe Gibbs did the same thing. And that's why you will never hear John criticize a player to the media. Never. And that's the thing, because he knows. And I used to try to tell, some of our younger head coaches when we would hire them, listen, when you're talking to your players, not only your players, their wives, their girlfriends, because that's who's listening on Mondays and after the games. So if you say something negative, they're going to run right to their boyfriend, husband, whatever, and tell them what you just said. So that's why you send a lot of messages, through the media to your team. And I think that's the thing that he's, going to sell his team on is that, we're good enough. Because if you got a quarterback, you got a chance. So I'm guessing Harbs likes Dart. I think Dart's got a chance. And the other thing is where were the Ravens terrible this year rushing the passer? The Giants, they have 3 better than anybody the Ravens had. So you can start there. And I wouldn't be shocked, at an early pick or something, to get a Kyle Hamilton type guy for their defense.
Well, Downs, of course, is the one safety that everybody's talking about high in the first round.
Yep, no doubt. And you know what? People say, well, you don't take safeties. And we took Sean Taylor 5th pick of the draft, when I was in Washington. And, if it's the right guy, oh, man. Because the thing with Harbs, and I see he interviewed, somebody from the Vikings, and that's what's going to be. Back to the other question that I would ask Harbs is, and what you always ask, people is who's your staff going to be? Right. Who are you bringing with you? And I think Monken will probably be there. I think the running back Taggart, he'll be there because that's Taggart. He worked for Jack Harbaugh or played for Jack Harbaugh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's part of the family, so he'll be there. I don't know if Greg Lewis will be the receiver coach. I'm not sure. And defensively, that is all up in the air, I would think. I would think John's looking to upgrade defensively for D coordinator.
More with Vinny Cerrato in just a few minutes. We go back to your chats. Mikey C, 6894 says, good day for G-Men Nation. Now draft a Buckeye player. My favorite, Sonny Styles, a missing piece on defense. Armand Duda says, praying for Mr. Mara to make a full recovery. I think everybody has the very same thoughts for the Giants co-owner. Ali Koenig says, she made it. And hello, Ali. Very nice of you to make the program tonight. Appreciate it very much. Armand Duda says, mission number 1 is always win the division. He says, also, Harbaugh handled the New York media masterfully today. Andy Hart, 6138, and we thank you for your contribution as a super user. He says, do you think Dable, I'm sure that's what he meant, is a good fit for Buffalo? As you may have seen in the chat, I responded, Dable loved it with the Bills. Remember, he's from upstate New York. And the Bills people certainly loved having him around in combination working with Josh Allen. So that would not surprise me, at the very least, if they talk to him. Whether or not they do a deal, I don't know. But you have to believe that there's going to be some kind of conversation there for sure. Armand Duda says, would love to keep Carmen Bracillo, the offensive line coach. You heard my story a little while ago about that. So keep your fingers crossed. Maybe there's a possibility. JFed4942 says it's a good day to be a Giants fan. Scotty Young, 1669, says, please, if any coach, keep that offensive line coach. This guy did wonders for the offensive line. And Armand Duda says, that's who I said, Carmen Brasillo. And also adding, Chris Mara really stepped up to the plate. And Mechanic Corner, 2551 says, yep, I agree. There is no question about that. Armand says, huge respect for Jack Harbaugh. One of the best qualities that made Harbaugh the best choice is that he comes from a coaching family. Oh, I don't think there's any question about that. I enjoyed a conversation with John Harbaugh's parents earlier today. After the presser was over, I was off to them by the side. And I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed talking to his father, Jack. It was a great pleasure, an honor, to be honest with you. Let's see. What else do we have here? Let's see. Louis Boogie NYC says, salute Armand Duda. KFTV in the house. Let's go, G-Men. And I appreciate you for joining us for sure. Lou Boogie NYC. Why not? More the merrier that come into our program here. Let's see. What do we have here? Lou Boogie NYC comes right back with a comment. I would like to see Wink Martindale or Rex Ryan be the DC. Todd Monken or a bright, innovative young mind on the offensive coordinator's job. Again, all that we heard from John Harbaugh today is that there are a group of Ravens coaches that he would like to bring over, but does not know exactly what their status is right now. They've got a lot of things going on in Baltimore, trying to figure out their own house as to whether or not those guys are going to be able to come. You've heard the reports, though. You know, Todd Monken has been a very effective offensive coordinator for young quarterbacks, particularly for quarterbacks who do have a variety of skills, such as Jackson Dart. So it would not at all be surprising if he's available that he would wind up landing with the Giants. Armand Duda says, can't say enough about how much I respect Daboll for speaking so highly of the Giants to Coach Harbaugh. Never heard of a coach doing that for a team that fired him to recommend them to his replacement. Armand, you are correct. Chris Mara was a huge point man in these negotiations. Tom Coughlin was absolutely huge in trying to get these two parties together. Quite frankly, yes, Brian Daboll was also part of that posse, trying to get John Harbaugh to the Giants. And let's not forget some of the other pieces. I'm talking about Jackson Dart, who not only was here on that Wednesday when Harbaugh took the plane ride up to the Meadowlands and spent like 2 hours with him. And Joe Shane said we had to actually get him out of the room because he was taking up too much of Harbaugh's time. Not only did they do that, but apparently, unbeknownst to the Giants, until they later found out, Harbaugh and Dart then had a lengthy phone conversation on their own. So, you know, big high five to Jackson Dart for helping this situation along as well, because, you know, the bottom line is the quarterback is such an integral part of what a coach wants when he goes and takes a new job. So the fact that Harbaugh says, I want guys who love football and are all in all the time and love football, well, that's exactly what Jackson Dart is. As Joe Shane told us, every one of the potential candidates that he had any kind of contact with, he loved all of them because he has so much respect for guys who have been in this league, and he just loves football so much. He will talk about it all day with anybody. It's so great situation to have Harbaugh and Dart obviously hit it off. Eli Manning also, by the way, was another one. It was John Harbaugh who actually made a phone call and reached out. He wanted to talk to Eli Manning, and Eli, who told the Giants, you need to go get an experienced head coach, okay? You need to go get one who has done something in this league and can reinstall discipline and get this team back on track. Eli was very vocal, telling management what he thought was necessary, and he also talked to John Harbaugh. and told him how important it was that he would come to the New York Giants. Armand Duda says, I hear Wink Martindale's the front runner for Jets DC. Again, there are reports all over the place. I believe things when I see it and when I know firsthand that they're happening. Who knows? He says if Coach Harbaugh asked him, he would interview for us before taking the Jets job. I don't know that, and I don't know that the Giants front office would allow that to happen. One thing is, Joe Schoen, let me make something clear. Joe Schoen and John Harbaugh, in particular John Harbaugh, stressed several times today, we all work for the boss. We all answer to the boss. John Mara is the boss. And ownership has always maintained veto power over any decision that the GM or head coach wanted to make. I don't know. Would the Giants execute veto power on Wink Martindale? I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that, but I suspect they probably would, given the way that Martindale's tenure ended with the Giants. Louis Boogie NYC says, yeah, we need an all-NFL super team of coaches. Let's get it. Ryan's Big Blue Podcast says, I'm hoping maybe we can get John. Oh, he says Fossil as special teams coordinator. Mikey C, 6894. Sonny Styles is just as fast as safety, and he played middle linebacker for 2 years. He also says he wants Davis Webb as quarterback coach. Davis Webb right now is the assistant coach and quarterbacks coach for the Broncos. To be honest with you, I don't know. I mean, it seems like we've heard that Davis Webb has gotten 2 inquiries for head coaching interviews. And you guys already know how much I love Davis Webb. So, you know, I'm not going to poo-poo what you just said, but I don't think he would come back here to take a quarterback coaching job. I think his next job is either offensive coordinator, or it might even be a big step to the head coaching job for somebody. Ryan's Big Blue Podcast says your coverage is awesome, Paul. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you for getting involved. Mikey C, 6894 says, would love Antonio Pierce as DC. I would never argue against Antonio Pierce as a defensive coordinator. I promise you. I promise you that. Ali Koenig says, any possibility of looking at Antonio Pierce for DC? Not sure how Harbaugh and he would mesh, but AP seems like someone who would make sense for this group of players. I agree. I would hope that Antonio Pierce, who did get a head coaching candidate interview with the Giants last week, I would hope that he would get another conversation here as potentially the DC. I think that, remember, he was the heart and soul and Steve Spagnuolo's right-hand man on the field for that championship team that knocked off the undefeated New England Patriots in Super Bowl 42. He is a football guy through and through. He is tough. He is rugged. He's not going to take guff from anybody. He's going to tell you exactly what it is right to your face. There's an awful lot to like about Antonio Pierce as a potential defensive coordinator candidate. And Ali also says AP loves football, and there is no doubt about that. A couple more here before I get back to Vinny Cerrato, because there's a lot more stuff, and you're going to love it. Louis Boogie NYG says, I think our running back stable in the pass rush was a big factor in John's decision. Need to get after the quarterback and pound out yards on the ground. Well, Jackson Dart was the number one reason, I do believe, but you're right. He was very happy with those other units as well. Louis says, you can't always get the draft 100% right, and I think Shane got some key positions right. Sure did, which made the Giants' job attractive. Shane gets a raw deal. Well, you're right, Louis. Louis, I couldn't agree with you more. John Harbaugh would not have been so pumped about coming to this team, okay? And he mentioned Dart. He mentioned Neighbors. He mentioned the running backs. He mentioned Dexter Lawrence. He talked about the pass rush with Burns and Carter. There's a collection of players here that made the number one free agent head coach on the market wanting to come. I mean, that in itself tells you that Joe Schoen deserved to stay and did a good enough job to warrant this position. And oh, by the way, Chris Mara and John Harbaugh both said that they believe that Joe Schoen's experience in this league, the time that he has spent in the NFL, in addition to all of the contacts he's made and how much knowledge he has about the league, are incredibly, incredibly valuable to the Giants' collaborative process. So there is a tremendous amount of respect for Joe Schoen in the building. And, you know, Lou Boogie NYC could not be more correct. You know, Hall of Fame executive Bill Polian, who built the Panthers, the Bills, the Colts, he would always say, if you really hit on a third of your draft picks, you have done a good job. I know, folks, that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's the kind of nature of the business, of what it is. Hey, Pietro Gambino, 834. Hi, Paul. Hope all is well. Didn't that presser today get you amped up? You want to run through a wall for Coach Harbaugh? I'm fired up. Record prediction this year. My friend, I don't talk about a realistic number for the record until I actually see the final 53 at the end of August. You know, when we get to the end of training camp and I see the 53, that's when I come up with a number. I had 7-10 last year, reasonably 8-9. And then, of course, if you get some balls bouncing the right way, maybe you win 9 games. But I had the Giants at 7-10, 8-9. That was my pick last year. And, of course, if not for the whole handful of games that they flushed down the toilet at the very end of 6 different games, they certainly would have been much closer to 7 or 8 wins than what they wound up being. He asks also, are you worried that Antonio Pierce doesn't have any DC experience, though? Well, look, he was a linebackers coach for the Raiders. He was a special assistant coach for the Giants back when McAdoo? When McAdoo was here? I believe it was. And or was it when Shermer was here? I'm forgetting now. But for 1 year, AP was a special defensive assistant for the Giants, and I know he was valuable to them then. Then he was linebackers coach for the Raiders, and then, of course, for a year and a half, wound up being their head coach. Mike McDaniel, according to JFed 4942, is expected to become OC of the Chargers, according to Adam Schefter. So there's a offensive coordinator guy who is now going to be checked off of the list. Armand Duda says Shane has done much better than people say, doesn't get enough credit, and gets more blame than he deserves. I agree with you 100%. He's improved each year from his first year as a GM. LV Giant 72 says AP is the definition picture of smash mouth football. And JDI, I believe it is, says, hey, Paul, do you think Harbaugh or any of his potential assistant coaches will be able to rehab the value of some of the more disappointing young players, assuming they even stay on the roster? My friend, that is exactly part of the reason that he is here. He is a teacher. We have heard that from everybody who knows him. And for whatever reason, that maybe some of the previous coaches of the last 2 years, position coaches, coordinators, or head coach, could not get through to some players. Well, I mean, I'll give you a great example. Tae Banks, mentally, he was really screwed up, okay? He had a really solid rookie season, showed a lot of flashes. He was awesome at Maryland. He deserved to be a first-round draft pick. And then the last 2 seasons, something was not connecting. I think one of the very important pieces to the Giants' puzzle amongst their young, talented players is getting Tae Banks back on track to play at least as well as he did as a rookie. This is the 4th year and final year of his contract. I'm sure the Giants are not going to pick up the 5th-year option. They will force him to play out the 4th and final year of his deal and then see where it goes from there. But he still has a contract for this fall in 2026. And man, oh man, it would do wonders for the Giants if Tae Banks can be resuscitated, if you will, to be at least the player he was as a rookie, if not better. And it will be up to this coaching staff to try to bring that out of him. Mark B, 8365, one of our regulars, says, great day for New York Giants football and fans. Looking forward to 2026. Allie says, small note. After watching the Natty last night, though my U lost, made me hungry for some DBs who can play like I saw last night. And then we have Lou Boogie NYC. Our weak spot is the secondary and the center position, looking for Shane to solidify them and draft in free agency. And Pietro Gambino, 834, says, you think Monken is guaranteed OC if he doesn't get a head coaching job? I don't think anything is guaranteed. He says, I want Davis Webb as OC on this roster. Apparently, he blew Sean Payton away in his interview. Also helped Daniel Jones in his best season. All right, let's go back to my interview with Vinny Cerrato because we are kind of running out of time with our program tonight. And, John Harbaugh did say he'd like to bring in a group of Ravens assistant coaches to New York. Although Vinny Cerrato says, don't automatically rule out all of the Giants' current staff members.
I would think that, knowing John and how detailed and organized he is, he's probably asked Chris Mara, John Mara, Joe, is there anybody on staff that you would recommend? Because they know them better than John does, unless John has some tie, to somebody there. So I don't know. John does his homework, when he's hiring staff members. He talks to a lot of people and stuff. So I'm not sure if he will keep anybody or won't keep anybody.
Right. Final question, Vinny. I know I've taken a lot of your time, and we appreciate it for sure. Go back to the draft for just a moment. What was the general consensus of how the Ravens philosophically approach the draft? Because I assume that's what Harbaugh will be comfortable with. George Young would always say best player available, right? That was his priority. And a lot of people in recent years have gone with that positional value thing, and sometimes people get suckered into drafting for need. So where do you suppose John's philosophy will be as he talks to Joe Shane about what they want to do?
I would think, and because Eric would always say, well, we're going to take best player available, and I'm sure, and Parcells, because everybody, I said it when I was in San Fran, I said it when I was in Washington. It's usually, and it's kind of easy to pick because if you look at, because the Ravens were always picking fairly late, when I was in Baltimore with Harbs and stuff. So best player available at position of need, because it always happened to be, they need it. You could kind of figure out, between two or three guys who they were looking at, but here's the thing is, John loves corners, he loves corners. They take a ton of corners. They take a lot of DBs. This year in the secondary, they have 5 first-round picks. So they take a lot of first-round players there. And he knows, and I think, John knows that he needs an offensive line, and he wants to run the football. He wants to run the football. It's kind of like Parcells. So what you got to have a stud running back. They got to go get him, they got to get him a stud running back who can, whether it be, because he had, Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry, Ray Wright. They always had a guy, that.
Vinny, I think he'll love Scatterbo.
Oh, I love Scatterbo. Yeah, I like Scatterbo, but can he be every down? That's the thing.
Well, that's why Tracy's here too. I think they think the two-headed combination can work. I don't know. We'll see.
How's the offensive line? Because,
was much better this year.
So they have they're not going to need a left tackle, with the 5th pick. So that's a big plus. You don't need a pass rusher. That's a big plus. I would think D-line, they're pretty good in the D-line, correct?
Well, with Dexter Lawrence, yes, yeah. But they didn't stop the run very well last year, and that has been a very big Achilles for this team for a couple of seasons.
Yeah, so I could see D-line or corner. Just and I don't know much about your team, but if you don't need a quarterback and you don't need a left tackle, I can see D-line or corner would be a really good possibility. Maybe safety. Kyle Hamilton was supposed to be. The thing where the Ravens made a lot of kind of hay too was guys that drop. Like Kyle Hamilton was supposed to be a top 5 pick, and then he ran 4.7 or whatever. But if you watch film, he plays fast, and that's the thing is functionality. And that's what Harbs is into, functional. Does he play fast? And that's another thing you're going to hear Harbs talk a lot about too, is being able to play fast. And you're able to play fast if you don't have to think. If you're thinking too much, you can't play fast, and that's some of the issue that they've had. I think, with John, they've brought in some players that, height, weight, speed wise, they were awesome. But you know what? They couldn't think. They couldn't handle the instincts and stuff. Like Trenton Simpson, a linebacker they had this year out of Clemson. The dude, I mean, if you look at him, height, weight, speed, all that, he had it all. And then Teddy Buchanan comes in, who had shorter arms and 4th-round pick and all. Because I asked John in our off-the-record meeting, I said, John, doesn't this short arm scare you? He said, hey, when I watch film, all I do is see the guy making tackles. That's what I like, And that's all. He had like 100 tackles before he got hurt.
Right. It did seem to me, though, looking over their drafts over the last several years, they usually pick wide receivers pretty high. Most of them haven't necessarily worked out very well.
I think
is that something you can learn from?
Oh, no doubt. Because the thing is, and Eric has talked about that too in his pre-draft meetings, is that you can't get afraid of drafting a receiver, if you hadn't hit on a guy. And I thought Zay Flowers is outstanding. He's been in the Pro Bowl twice. So, they've done a good job there. And the other thing that Harbaugh is going to want is tight ends. And I think, the Giants fans, going back to the Bavaros and Shockies, I think the Giants fans are going to like that, because the Ravens have always with John, have had good tight ends. So that's going to be – and if Todd Monken's there, same thing. Todd had Bowers at Georgia, and then he's had all the Ravens guys. So, yeah, tight end is going to be a big part of the offense.
Final thought, Vinny. What would you tell Giants fans about John Harbaugh, maybe that they haven't heard before, or what they really should expect from their team this year?
Well, I think they're going to be a disciplined team. And I think they're going to be a smart team that can play fast. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people. I think John's an outstanding coach. And the thing is when John walks into that press conference today and I always like to, when I was interviewing candidates for head coaches, when he walks into a room, does he take control of that room? I remember like Lou Holtz, when he first walked into the meeting at Notre Dame, and like kids had their shoes up on their chairs and all. And he said, stand up, sit up straight, and they knew, who was in charge. And I think when the players and stuff, they're going to know today who's in charge, because Harbs is going to have a presence when he walks in. And he knows that, dealing with the New York media is not easy, and he knows that first impressions are going to be big. And does he need to win the press conference today? Yes. I'll give you another one. Like the first time Jim Zorn was talked to the media in Washington, it was he said maroon and gold for the Redskin colors, not burgundy and gold. And that was, oh my God, Dan walks back into his office and he said to me, he said, did I just hire the wrong guy?
So the pressure in New York is not going to make John Harbaugh wilt at all, will it?
No, not at all. John, let me just say this. John's a very prepared person. He'll be prepared.
And so there you have it. A really good conversation with longtime NFL personnel director Vinny Cerrato, a Super Bowl champion and a good friend of many years of John Harbaugh, giving us a lot of really good insight into what makes John Harbaugh tick and the kinds of things that he will bring to the New York Football Giants. Let's go through our chats because there's a bunch of them. And by the way, over 1,000 live tonight, once again. You guys have really been doing a great job of spreading the word about our program, and we're getting more and more people constantly now, the last few weeks, coming in to join us on the Big Blue Breakdown Live. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, because after all, this show is for you guys. All right, let's see. What do we have here? We have Craig, 5592 in the draft. Do we get another tight end or sign one? I don't know. I think the Giants are probably going to go with the 4 they have. I think that obviously Theo Johnson is here. You know, they got to fix the dropsies, but he says he's going to work on that. I do believe Daniel Bellinger is going to be someone they badly want to re-sign. I really do, and I think he will. And he fits John Harbaugh's system perfectly. Chris Manhertz is a moose of a blocker. I could see him potentially. In fact, I think he will be back in camp competing for a job. And obviously Thomas Fedoni, who, you know, we saw last year for a little bit until he broke his foot. So I think those are the 4 tight ends that are going to compete for spots. I don't think the Giants bring in another tight end. I just don't, unless if you see Daniel Bellinger leave. I don't think that's going to happen. I know he wants to stay. They want him. Let's see if they can make it work. And I don't think he's going to have to break the bank in order to return to the Giants. Let's see here. Isaac Moore, 1242. Harbaugh says all the right things. We should all be excited for the future. Let's go. And Armand's right. Drafting for a need is never a good way to go about it. That's right. The old theory, as Ernie Accorsi used to say, you never want to draft desperate. Mikey C, 6894. Banks and Flott remind me of Corey Webster. AP would notice that. Harbaugh can bring it out of them. No, actually, Flott had a career year this year. He played really, really well. There's nothing to question about Cordell Flott, except he did miss a couple of games again. Now, having said that, he's also a free agent. And I think Cordell Flott is going to get some cash thrown at him. It would not shock me if the Giants can't retain him. But Banks is going to be here this year. He's under contract. So they need to pull the best out of him again. There's no doubt about that. JDI says, Paul Shane has shown he believes in positional value, while Harbaugh seems like the draft best player available. If Caleb Downs, the safety, is the BPA at 5, do you think we take him? Well, here's the one thing about it. Yes, given the Harbaugh factor, maybe the Giants do. They've got a second-round pick invested, okay, in one safety. They've got big money invested in the other safety. Nubin was the second-round pick, and of course, Javon Holland got big money last year. So those 2 guys are going to be here, and you would assume they're going to be starters. Now, if you're going to play a 3-safety package, if the defensive coordinator says, I want to play a ton of 3 safeties, well, now who's your 3rd safety? Dane Belton is a free agent. He just had a career year with 100 tackles and played really well on special teams. I don't know. Is Dane Belton coming back? I don't know the answer to that. If he does not, and your defensive coordinator says, I want to play a lot of 3 safeties, then you do need another safety. So just in talking about the need quotient there. But remember, the Giants could also use another stud on the offensive line to make sure that they replenish there, because you could lose Illuminor, okay? You could lose Van Roten to retirement. You could lose Illuminor to free agency. You know, I know Marcus Bowe, we all talk about Bowe possibly being the starting right tackle. I get that, okay? They certainly need to get a big play wide receiver. Neighbors is coming off a serious injury. You don't know exactly when he'll be back or exactly how great he'll be. So you absolutely have another need at wide receiver. I personally would love to see a skyscraper. You know, I'm not getting into names of combine guys now. I'll do it more as we get closer to the combine. But suffice it to say, Ohio State has a really, really good big play wide receiver. But again, we'll save that for another time. Could the Giants use depth at corner? Absolutely, they could. If Flott goes free agent, Paulson Adebo had a really rough year last season. He was not the guy that they signed off of the New Orleans Saints roster. He needs to bounce back. Tae Banks needs to bounce back. So that's two guys that need to bounce back, and Flott might be out the door with a big wad of cash in his pocket. So you absolutely have to look at enhancing the cornerback position. So in terms of need, and of course I've said this on Big Blue Kickoff Live, the Giants could also use another stud defensive tackle because they're still giving up too many yards in the run game. A lot of needs here. I know there's a lot to like about the Giants, but there's also a bunch of needs too. All right. Isaac Moore says, bring in Isaiah Likely from the Ravens. I wouldn't do that. I think the Giants have enough for tight ends to choose from. Lou Boogie NYC says, wouldn't mind Downs, but okay with any DB, safety, or corner. We may also need to replace Wan'Dale Robinson in the second or third round. And yes, maybe another tight end. Isaac Moore says, we're keeping Wan'Dale. I don't know how you know that. Over 90 catches, over 1,000 yards. He's going to get big money thrown at him. I don't know that the Giants can chase him with the kind of offers that he is going to get. Armand Duda says, Wellington Mara was never more mad than after Bavaro was traded. That's incorrect. Mark Bavaro had microfracture surgery at a time when it was experimental following the Giants' Super Bowl 25 victory against the Buffalo Bills. At that time, again, that was a very experimental surgery. In fact, Charles Way was never able to really come back from that, and he was forced to retire. You'll remember, I believe, one of the basketball players, I think Jason Kidd was one of the guys who might have had that as well. I think Omari Stoudemire had microfracture to his knee. In any event, Bavaro had the microfracture surgery. The Giants physicians, who have always been very conservative and more concerned about the player's health and future than most any other team in the league, they told Mark Bavaro, it's not a good idea for you to continue playing after the microfracture surgery. It's better for you so that you can wind up walking as you get older because there's going to be deterioration. You're better off leaving the game now. And so the Giants released Mark Bavaro at that point. Of course, we know he wound up also playing with Cleveland and Philadelphia before he finally did hang it up because he wanted to keep playing. The Giants just did not believe medically that it was a smart thing for him to do. Isaac Moore, 1248, says, I'd rather keep trade Thibodeau. I'd rather trade Kayvon Thibodeau and keep Wan'Dale Robinson. Interesting thought. He said, if we, here's Lou Boogie NYC, if we trade Tibbs for a second or third and fifth round pick, we'd have to consider replenishing our lost picks. Interesting thought. Oman Duda wants to keep Bellinger. Let's see. Craig, 5592, top 5 pick this year, but there aren't top wide receivers like neighbors in this draft. Do you see a trade now, even though it's a weak draft? No, I don't think anybody wants to come up and trade with the Giants for their number 5 pick. I really don't. And again, Ohio State has a big play wide receiver. Some people would argue that he certainly is worth the 5th pick. John Professorio, 7005, says, Paul, I'm loving the edge rushers from the Hurricanes along with Baker from Indiana, in a much better mood about the team these days. Armand Duda says, I would love a skyscraper wide receiver. You know exactly where I'm coming from. I don't know if that's the pick there, but it's something I'm certainly thinking about. Mikey C, 6894, that's why I say draft Sonny Styles and reside, I guess he means Belton, and re-sign Belton, and Phillips plays the nickel. Yes, he does play the nickel. And see, JDI, he had to go and do it. He went and named names, okay? All right, so it's out of the bag. Carnell Tate from Ohio State. Yes, Ohio State, known as wide receiver U, okay? Because, man, they've been putting them out like donuts in the last several years. Yes, Carnell Tate of Ohio State is a guy I'd seriously look at 5. Jordan Tyson, Arizona State, another guy certainly you could look at there, and Mekhi Lemon from USC. Mikey, 6894, real talk, Hodges plays God for the G-men. He could be a red zone treat. I guess he means Isaiah Hodgins, I think. Anyway. GRC M2N. The run defense needs to be fixed once and for all. No argument for me there. I've said that for a while. I'd love a defensive tackle like Peter Woods from Clemson. All right, he's probably a tweener between a plugger, a nose, and a three technique. He probably could be a tweener depending upon how much weight and power you add to his game. Is he a 5 overall? Probably not. But I think they need to get another stud defensive tackle. Okay. Let's see. Armand Dudas says, my mistake about Bavaro. I must have misremembered Bob Papa telling the story. Yeah, because Bavaro was not traded. He was not traded. He was released as a failed physical for his own good. JDI says, I think Harbaugh fixes our linebacker issues. We need more athleticism and depth at that position. Well, Micah McFadden, coming off a broken foot, he's rehabbing very well. He anticipates signing a 1-year prove-it deal for 2026. He thinks he would like it to be with the Giants, depending upon who the defensive coordinator is. And I think that's a two-way question. You got to find out who the DC is, whether or not they want Micah McFadden, and if then he wants to stay here in that system. But McFadden was a dramatic loss to the Giants' rush defense. There's no question about that. Okay, Mikey C, 6894. Wade and Flott might be gone. Too bad you can't keep your own. Jermaine Luminor should. Is the first person they signed as a free agent. He's too versatile. Let go. I understand. Again, I think he's going to get a bigger number than what the Giants might be able to afford. And finally, Kyle Canastra says, lots to do with not a lot of cap. I wonder how much roster turnover we will see this year. The Giants are reportedly going to be somewhere in the middle of the NFL in cap space for 2026. And I know there have been a lot of numbers out there in the last couple of weeks, reported cap space, projected cap space. Remember, the cap is also going to go up, as it always does each and every spring. So that's going to adjust the number as well. And then there are always adjustments you can make on contracts, or there are certain guys, yes, there are certain guys who you will let go for economic reasons and wind up saving a chunk of money. You'll take on little dead money on your cap, but you'll save a whole lot more if you move on from some certain guys. All right, folks, that brings us to the end of our program tonight. A very special edition of the Big Blue Breakdown Live. If you joined us late, and I see a lot of people did join us over the course of the last hour to the last half hour, okay, please, by all means, go back to the archive, rewind it. About 15 minutes into the program, we had former Giant safety Andrew Adams, played for the Giants in 2016 and 2017, then played for the Baltimore Ravens and Jim Harbaugh in 2023. He gave us a firsthand account of what it's like to be a player on Jim Harbaugh's roster. That was very interesting at about 15 minutes into the program. And then, of course, a little bit later on, and you could be able to search through the archive, we chopped up a very long, almost a half-hour interview with Director of Player Personnel, Vinny Cerrato, who won a Super Bowl with the 49ers, also worked with the Redskins, had nearly 20 years of personnel front office experience in the National Football League. He is a longtime dear friend of John Harbaugh. And so consequently, he had an awful lot to tell us about what John Harbaugh's style is, what he would be thinking, what he would want to do, all the kinds of things that Harbaugh is going to attempt as he tries to get the Giants back into the playoff conversation. Not in 2027, but in 2026. Folks, we'll be back. For those of you who don't know, we are usually here every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, with another edition of the Big Blue Breakdown Live, where we take your chats, your phone calls, and your video calls, and we talk New York Giants football for at least an hour. Sometimes it's 90 minutes. Sometimes it's an hour and 45. We've done 2 hours. Even on occasion, we've done 3 hours, because you, the fans, that's why we're here. And if you won't let me get up from this seat, I will stay here. Well, my wife won't let me, but I would probably stay here all night and talk Giants football 25 hours out of the day. Remember, all of your Giants coverage is also available on NY Giants on SI, the YouTube channel, and the media network. Until next time, I bid you a very good farewell and good night. This has been a special edition, once again, the John Harbaugh Head Coaches edition of the Big Blue Breakdown Live. I'm Paul Dottino. We'll see you again soon, everybody.